Hello. Today we're going to be talking about big book phobia and how to conquer it. So, this year, for me, the year 2023, has been a year of self discovery. I have read more this year than I have any year previous in my adult life. I have read books that I've only ever dreamt of reading, one of them being Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And as you can see, it's marked up. And I've made a video about reading this. I read it about 6, 7, maybe 8 months ago. I think it was 6 months though. And, you know, I had never read a book of this size. And this book isn't even that big. It's like I don't consider this a big book. I don't consider it a tome by any means. I consider it a mid-sized book. I think anything over 650, 700 pages can be considered a tome. This sits right just over 600 pages by like a few pages. So I think it fits comfortably in the mid-sized book range. But it's very dense with information, even though it's a mid-sized book. So I came out of it feeling like I had read a lot more than I did. And so in this reading journey, have come to a certain strategy in how I read big books. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, big books can be very daunting. They can be very intimidating. And I mean, they take so much of your time. It's a huge time investment to read a large work, especially if it's a classic like Moby Dick. As I said before, Moby Dick isn't a tome, in my opinion, by any stretch of the imagination, but it was so densely packed with vital information to the story, that I felt like, wow, I was taking in so much, and there were moments when I was reading it where I was like, whoa, like this is a lot. And so one of the things that I did as I was reading Moby Dick was to break it up and to take my time with it. So I think that is rule number 1 when trying to overcome book fear, big book fear, is that you want to take your time. You want to set aside a time frame. And however you come to that time frame, however you come up with however long it might take you, just come to a certain agreement with yourself and understand that you're going to spend X amount of time reading this book, and it's not going to be one and done. It's not going to be super quick. And I think that helps. I think that helps you to kind of put yourself in a space where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. Number 2, I think that you should have small goals in your reading with the book. And so I'm going to show you an example with a book that I just recently read, which was Anna Karenina. Holy shit. So with Anna Karenina, give me one moment. Hear me. So with Anna Karenina, as you can see, I have marked it up at the top with these tabs. And these were tabs. They're not taken out, all of them, because I did read with an audiobook, and I'm going to come to that in a second. But as you can see, I have pages tabbed out, and this is in about 40 page increments. So every 40 pages, there's a tab for me to take out, and that's my reading for the day. Once I take that tab out, I've reached my goal for that day, and I can either put the book down or I can continue reading if that's what I so choose to do. And so what that method does is it helps you to reward yourself for the time that you took to read a certain segment of the book and to make progress in the book. Because with big books, it really is a labor of patience and just understanding that at some point you will come to the end, even if it feels like it's taking forever. But as great as that sounds, that can be very discouraging because, again, if you set out a month to read a huge book, you set out a month to read an 1,100 page book, a 1,200 page book, it can feel like you're not getting anywhere. You get to 300 pages in the book and you still have this big brick, this huge expanse of reading to still do, and you feel like you've read so much, and you have. 300 pages is pretty significant. But you look at the book and you're like, it's like I haven't even dented this thing. It's an 1,100 page book and I've read 300. I haven't even put a dent in this thing yet. This book is 3 of what I've read so far. And it can be very discouraging, which would cause you to stop, or could cause you to stop. And so with this method of breaking it down with sticky tabs between every however many pages you want it to be, when you reach that tab, you feel like, wow, I've really done something. You take what seems like a daunting task and you break it down into very manageable sections. And when you conquer each section, it just makes you feel really good because you're like, okay, I'm climbing, I'm chugging along, I'm on my way. And I think that is going to inspire you to keep going. It certainly inspires me to keep going. And often I set, let's say 40 pages is the amount that I want to read in a day, and I go over that. And then you feel even more happy and even more elation for the fact that you didn't take down one goal, but you took down 2, maybe you took down 3. And it's like, yeah, even though, you've read 300 pages and you still have like 800 more to go, you're excited because you're not thinking about the whole of the 800. You're thinking about getting through 44 pages, getting through 80 pages, getting through however many pages you have set with those stickies, every other whatever. And so that helps me and has helped me to conquer big book fear. And then another thing, I think this is number 3 or number 4, I don't know. Give me a second. So it was point number 3. And point number 3 is to tandem read with an audiobook of the big book that you're reading. Because I know for me, it can be very difficult to focus on one book and to focus for long periods of time. And I know, being an adult and having chores and things to do around the house on the 2 days that you're off from your full-time job, there isn't really a whole lot of room to sit down all day and to just read and devour a book. And so I find that reading a physical book and also having an audiobook copy helps immensely and helps me to get through these books a lot faster than I would if I were to just read them. And during the week, in my commute and, with all the responsibilities of daily life, it's just a little difficult to squeeze in the time to sit down and to visually read a book for an extended period of time. You may have 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, but for someone like me who likes to read in big chunks, who essentially likes to binge read, that's pretty difficult because I'm not getting as much of the story if I'm just reading for 15 minutes and it takes 30 to read a chapter because the chapters are very long. With a big book like Anna Karenina, for example, where the chapters are short, it's perfect because yes, I can read 2 or 3 chapters. Most times I found reading Anna Karenina in 15 minutes. I could sit down for my lunch break and read a few chapters with or without the audiobook. But if you're reading something, say, like Moby Dick, where the chapters can be very long, they can be several pages. And as I mentioned before, it's very dense. There's a lot of information, you know, in comparing Anna Karenina to Moby Dick. Anna Karenina was a lot easier to read than Moby Dick was. And you also have to think about, sure, the chapters could be short, but what's the subject matter? What are we reading about? Um, how densely packed is it? How meaty is what you're reading? Um, and you'll find that those things can affect how long it takes you to read a chapter. And so I find that having an audiobook to go along with a big, long, juicy novel just makes it easier because I can spend more time reading it. Because with my line of work, I do data entry, so I can listen to books all day long at work. With the exception of times where I have to make phone calls or when I'm answering phone calls or when I'm interacting with other employees. But for the most part throughout the day, I mean, I'm talking about 8, 9, 10 hours of free time to listen to an audiobook as I'm working. And so it just helps me to read them a lot faster, and it motivates me, and it helps to keep my brain engaged because I'm hearing someone read it. It's being orated to me. Yeah. And so that would lead me to a fourth point, which is to break up the reading with smaller books, smaller, easier to read books. So, whatever that looks like for you, whatever that means, if that's manga, if that is, light romance novels, light fiction novels, novels that are less than 300 pages. If we're talking about comics, if we're talking about reading poetry in between, if we're talking about reading letters and smaller works, whatever that means for you, break it up. If you're feeling like you're being overwhelmed by all of this information, like I did sometimes when I was reading Moby Dick, I would break it up and I would read books I would read YA books, I would read small nonfiction books. As I read Moby Dick, I read one YA, I read a mystery, I read a nonfiction book, and right after I finished Moby Dick, I read Antigone, which is a very, very short, probably only about 50, 60 page play. And that's 4 books during the process of reading one larger work. And that can help because it can, number one, help you to appreciate simpler works. Because I think in the scholastic arena and the academic arena, people can sort of look down upon novels that are short and sweet, novels that are just fluffy, that are just entertainment. But as a reader, whether you're doing it academically or not, they have their place. I'm someone who reads for entertainment, and different things entertain me, but I appreciate every work of literature that I read for different reasons. And I didn't realize that until I read Moby Dick, where I was reading something that was more difficult than probably anything I've ever read before. And I appreciated Moby Dick for what it was But then as I was reading this YA, which people tend to look down upon, and you may think, oh, that's not, you see somebody reading YA and you're thinking, oh, they're reading YA. You know what I mean? But it has its place. And it helped me to appreciate the simplicity of a good story. It helped me to take a load off, and it helped me to kind of reset my brain and to just still do something that I really enjoy, but just have it not be so intense and not be so much of a learning experience and not be so much of a processing experience. Just allowing me to kick back and read a book and not have to think much about it. And there's a place for that in your life as a reader. And so, those are my tips for reading bigger works and getting into bigger books. And I guess I'm just going to speak about how I'm feeling right now and why I'm so into reading books right now. And that is because I went through a pretty long period of just ferociously reading. I'm talking reading 16, 17, 18 books in a month. I was going really, really strong, and that was consistent. It was like going up and up and up the amount of books that I would read per month. I started reading consistently last year around this time. I fell in love with reading again. And, with every month that passed, I just read more and more books. I was just devouring everything that I read. And, that lasted for 6-7 months. And then there came this big slowdown where it was like, okay, I was still reading, but I was reading significantly less, reading 1 book a month, 2 books a month. And it was because I had read so many amazing books, Moby Dick being one of them. It was the first book I read this year of 2023, one of the first books I read this year of 2023, and it was so good. It blew my mind. And when you read a book and it's so outstanding, it's so spectacular, it's so magnificent, it is very difficult to come down off of that and to then just read something that's just okay. It's so difficult. It's just incredibly hard to come off of reading what you feel subjectively is a masterpiece and reading something that, I mean, let me set the stage. You come off of reading something that felt like it changed your life, and it was this labor of love on the author's part. They worked so hard to write this. They cared so much about the craft of writing and had so much passion for what they were putting down on this paper, because that's the only way they could have written something so magnificent, is if they cared about it, if they were passionate about it, if they worked hard and labored over it. And then you go and you pick something up where it's like the author doesn't even care to edit the book properly. And listen, I've had it happen. And you're just like, what? You're just kind of like in disgust, because you know what I mean? And if you are someone who loves writing, who loves reading, who loves language and literature, you'll understand what I'm saying, I think. It's a very beautiful thing being able to create worlds, being able to build this place where people can transport into and get lost from their real daily day-to-day life. That is magic. And it from someone's pen. And I think some authors don't understand that, and they don't have the passion. They don't have, number one, they don't have the talent. They just don't have the talent, because I do believe that Stephen King said it best. Some people just have the gift of writing and others don't. And of course, I'm not saying it word for word. I probably butchered what he said, but the message was that some people have it and some people don't. Some people have the gift of telling a story and some people don't. And when you read a book written by someone who had the gift of telling a story, and not only had the gift of telling a story, but worked hard to cultivate that talent and to hone it and to sharpen it, it can be very sobering and very disheartening even to come off of reading something like that and to go into reading something where not even half as much care was put into the process of creating this work of fiction. And so that's what I found happening. And so I was weary of reading, and I slowed down reading for a while because I just was reading some really good books, and then it just kind of stopped. I was coming across books that just weren't giving me that feeling, and so I found myself rereading books that I love and still longing to read because I love it. It's one of my huge hobbies. And up until recently this summer, it's been super hard for me to read anything. And now at this point, I'm feeling very ferocious again. I'm feeling very hungry for good literature and for books to read. And I still am having a hard time finding smaller works that are really, really good, that really, really sing out to me and call out to me. And so I have begun to read larger works just because they take more time and because I can just invest myself into the process of reading something larger because it'll take more time, and all the while I can still look for other books to read while putting my time and energy into reading something simultaneously. So big books for me right now at this point in my life are a way to, I guess, sort of bide the time as I look for and kind of try to discover smaller works, because I love reading smaller books. I love the feeling of just reading a book in a day. That's an amazing feeling. But as I look for books like that, I'll just go ahead and attack these big boys. And I hope that some of my tips on how I do that will help you to conquer big book fear as well, because you needn't fear over the thicker books, but embrace them, because it can be a wonderful time getting lost in them, and you can learn a lot, and it can just be this great adventure, you reading a big book. And so I hope that these tips can be of some help to you, and I hope that I explained my stance on reading big books accurately and concisely and clearly. And wherever you are, I hope that you're having a good day. I hope that you will or continue to read a good book. And you know what? I'll see you when I see you.